So they popped into my bedroom, as they do. They don't, they don't ring the doorbell. They don't make an appointment. They just show up and they said, "We need you to save your daughter." And, part of me was like, what are you talking about? And then the other part didn't seem odd to me at all. And so I agreed to go on a craft with them. And they put me in this isolated room that looked like stainless steel white. It was very sterile looking. And they just set me down. And by they, it's the Grays. And they brought in this little girl to me. And she was probably, I don't know, 1.5 to 2 feet tall. And she weighed ounces rather than pounds. And she looked on the verge of death. And they told me that she was experiencing failure to thrive because she had too much human in her. And they put her in my arms. You're right, it's healing for me to talk about this, but it doesn't mean it's not painful. And they put her in my arms, and every maternal instinct that I didn't think I had kicked into gear. And I held her and kissed her and loved her. And I didn't know what else to do other than just be a mom to her. And I have no concept of time. I think I keep saying it felt like maybe around 4 hours. But again, it could have been 4 days. I really don't know. So I just say about 4 hours, and I physically saw color come back into her face, and this peaches and cream complexion. And she was just adorable. She was so sweet, and the connection in our eyes. And shortly after I saw the color come back into her face, the Grace came back in the room to get her. And I thought, how can I give her? This is my child. This is my daughter. How can I give her to these emotionless beings? And to this day, I struggle with it. And I thought, they might not have an emotional connection to her, but it's the only family she's ever known. And she had an emotional connection to them. And by then she jumped off my lap. And even though I say she was 1.5 to 2 feet tall and weighed ounces, she was older. And by older, I want to say maybe age 2, because she could easily walk. And she did. She jumped off my lap and ran over to them, into their arms. And I just had to come to terms that I did my job, that I saved her. And she was going back to the only family that she knew.
Today on the show, I got KRISTI Pederson. I interviewed her in person at the Ozark UFO conference this year, and she was definitely the talk of the town. She had line out the door just to get an autograph, get one of her books. But man, it's a treat, an honor. KRISTI Pederson, welcome to Beyond Forbidden. How you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
So, what did you think whenever you got the reaction from everybody at the conference? Because did you go in thinking like, I got this, everybody's going to love it? Did you, just kidding. But like, well, what did you think? Because out of all the speakers there at the conference, and you had Ben Hansen and the guy also,
Sean Cahill.
Yes. Even out of those two guys, if I had to guess, just hearing other people talk and just visually seeing, you were definitely the fan favorite. So how did that make you feel? And have you got a bunch of reactions since the conference?
Well, thank you for that compliment, by the way. I appreciate it. I went into it and I almost redid my talk the day before, because I thought, these people are here to hear about extraterrestrials. They're here to hear about UFOs. And I sandwich in a lot of spirituality in my talk. And this is my life story. I've got no proof and I've got no pictures. I don't have anything like that. It's just my story and what's happened to me. And I almost completely changed my talk. And I thought, no, I just got to be me. I got to get up there, talk from the heart, tell my story, and I'm just thrilled that it was as well received as it was. Because I don't know if you remember, but the PowerPoint slide was basically every slide was the cover of my book.
Yeah.
And it was just, so I wasn't reading slides, it was just truly coming from my heart spontaneously.
Maybe that's why everybody resonated with it a lot. And also, since then, when I interviewed you there in person, I think it was only like a 20-minute interview. But since then, I've actually dug into your book. I don't have the physical copy. I do have the Audible book of your book, We Are Not Alone. And but I was skimming through, taking notes and things. I was like, oh my gosh, some of these things that I have that I actually have on my notes that I took, she said this for almost verbatim in the conference. It's how did you remember? It's almost like you have picture perfect recall, because some of the stuff a lot of people, because I've interviewed a lot of people since 2010, and a lot of the times they don't remember things that they put in the book.
And that's really a good point, but this is my life, and I've been living it. My first experience was at the age of 5 with extraterrestrials. And so when it's your life, it's a little bit easier to recall things. And, my latest book, it's called Messages from Ramadir, and we can go back to that. But that whole book was channeled. And so now every time I open that book to talk, I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting. Wow, where did that come from? And I've got no clue because it was channeled. Where we are not alone, that's my life. And I lived it. So it's very easy for me to talk about it.
So, and we can definitely. I want to touch on your newest book, Messages from Ramadir. Um,
Mm.
but this isn't going to be the last time I'm going to have you on. And maybe in the next month, I want to touch on that book because I want to kind of go in
Okay.
chronological order because a lot of people, especially my Facebook page, which I got a lot of people that follow my Facebook page and my YouTube channel, my Patreon members, they may not have seen that in-person interview, or they may not know enough of you, even though if they did watch that face-to-face interview. So I kind of want to
Mhm.
go back to the book We Are Not Alone, My Extraterrestrial Contact, that came out January 22nd, I believe, of 2020.
Mhm.
Um, so first thing at the conference, I guess since doing podcasting since 2010, I've interviewed many people where I don't know that bullshit meter goes off and raises to a degree. And after talking to you and interviewing you at the Ozark UFO conference, and that BS meter was not there. It didn't raise at
Thank you.
all. It didn't. And it's obvious after talking to you and after interviewing you, you can tell that you have definitely experienced a lot of things throughout your life. And I believe that you believe all your experiences you have had are real. And it's obvious, especially in listening to you on a podcast is different. But whenever you speak to somebody and you see somebody, look at their eyes like up and close and personal, like I did with you at the conference, you can definitely tell when somebody's for real or not.
Yeah, that's very true.
So
Do you want to help support Beyond Forbidden and receive extra content that's not seen anywhere else? By becoming a patron, a few things you will receive are the full-length 90-minute or 120-minute podcast episode. Members will also receive a private link of the video podcast and will only be exclusive to Patreon members. In-person, face-to-face interviews with some of the most well-known, respected researchers. Behind-the-scenes footage of interviews not seen anywhere else. And that's just a few perks. So what do you have to lose? Cut out one brain-rotting, overly processed Happy Meal a month that doesn't do anything beneficial for your mind, body, and spirit, and become a Patreon for just $5.
I guess let's kind of go back. Let's go back to the origins of when did all of this start? When did some of the, I guess, where your upbringings, when did a lot of the, and then when did the paranormal occurrences and experiences begin to happen? Whenever, I guess, back then.
My first memory of contact is at the age of 5. And since then, I've been under hypnosis many, many times, and this is a multi-life agreement that I've had with extraterrestrials. But my first memory in this lifetime is at the age of 5, and I was really, really sick. My whole family had had the flu, a 24-hour bug, and everybody got over it except me. And 5 days later, I was still throwing up constantly all day long. My mother even propped me upside down on the sofa and had a little pail underneath my head so I wouldn't mess up the carpet or what, as only moms can do. And after day 5, she finally called the doctor, and the doctor said, "Get her to the hospital right now. I will meet you there." So this would have been 1960. And so my mom called my dad. We had one car at the time, and my dad came home to watch my siblings while my mom took me to the hospital and checked me in. And they put me in this bed of ice, and it's like ice on the bed. And then they kind of jury rigged the sheets in almost like a V form and laid me in on the bed to lower my temperature. And there was this nurse who was so sweet and so nice, but I was in ICU, so she was there constantly for me and feeding me orange soda, Fanta orange soda, which at one time was my favorite.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. And after about 2 hours, it wasn't my favorite there either. Because she kept force feeding this orange soda to again lower my temperature. And now during the middle of the night, there was no light in my room, really no light in the hallways unless they had the door shut. But I don't remember any ambient light whatsoever. No noise. And I remember I could move my eyes, but I became paralyzed. And I could see the nurse at my head. She froze. And I go, wow, this is weird. And this doctor walked in the room, but he didn't look like any doctor that I'd ever seen before. And he had this stethoscope in his pocket. And the reason I remember that is because it was so bright. And I don't know what it was reflecting off, but it completely blocked out his face. And so this doctor came to my side and told me I would always be safe and always be protected. And I remember thinking, well, why wouldn't I be? I'm a little girl with a loving family. Why wouldn't I be safe and protected? Well, years later, under hypnosis, that was a gray, an extraterrestrial, that came to tell me that. And there were 2 other grays with him on the other side of me. And they came just to let me know I was not going to die. And at age 5, you don't really know what death is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my first memory. And then there seems to be a bit of a gap there, but I had recurring dreams as a little girl of monkeys coming and dancing and playing with me and just having the best time. Well, again, under hypnosis, those were not monkeys. And that's kind of a common thing because extraterrestrials can make themselves look however they want to look, and evidently to not scare me because I was having fun with those monkeys. We were just playing, doing dishes, having a good time. And so those were really my only childhood memories. And then I know I was having experiences because I was a very odd child.
Me too.
And yeah, I think, anybody that's experienced or has an interest in the paranormal has a very odd childhood. But I also remember around the age of 12, I was babysitting, and the home that I babysat for was just kitty corner from the house where I lived. And the parents had come home maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. And back in the day, they could just watch me from their door to make sure I got home safely. Today they'd walk you to your door and be a little bit more conscientious of that. But I would climb over the fence, climb through our lilac bushes, and I would lay down in the grass and just stare up at the sky and say, I want to go home. I want to go home. And my home was just a few feet from me, but it wasn't the home where I lived with my family. I knew it was somewhere up in the stars. And I would just sit and cry. And that seems to be a reoccurring theme through my life, is just sitting outside, walking outside, staring at the sky and saying, I want to go home. I want to go home. Yeah, and then my next memory isn't until the age of 30.
Wow.
Do you want me to keep going
Well,
with that?
well, first off, just trying to give a little bit of groundwork for those. Like I said, I only got to interview you for about 20 minutes because it was just crazy.
Yeah.
The conference.
Yeah.
But what did your friends and family think of you? I guess it is moving forward a little bit, I guess. But what did your friends and family think of you whenever you came forward and started talking about these things and your experiences?
I never talked about them. But I was still considered a very odd child and aggressive, bold, because I would ask my parents things and religious things too. And they, oh, how can you ask that question? I'm like, I can't believe you would have the nerve to do that. So I was constantly, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? And I kept hearing that over and over and over. And I had so many physical anomalies too that I learned from a very young age that there was something wrong with me. And my siblings would ask me the same thing. What is wrong with you? Why do you say these things? Why do you act this way? And I would be in shock, but it never stopped me. I just kept going and, whatever was on my mind, I said. And even at my high school graduation party, told my parents, or I announced that I was an atheist. That went over really well with my Lutheran family. And the thing is, I wasn't an atheist. I didn't know the word for agnostic. And I was just questioning things because I'd always ask, if God is so loving, why are we supposed to fear him? And nobody had an answer for me. And so from a very young age, I had these questions with the hypocrisy in the Lutheran church where I was raised. And I would ask the questions and what is wrong with me that I would ask those questions? And it was basically because nobody had an answer.
And I was just
Yeah.
about to say, like, and by the way, I grew up in the Southern Pentecostal. I live in Louisiana. Trust me, I get it. I totally understand. But how do you make sense in a world that didn't accept you back then? And how did you make sense of coming to the realization of you finally remembering your contact experience?
Well, it took hypnosis. I've had two real life experiences. The rest came to me in what I call downloads, which is, if somebody handed you a book, you say, okay, I've got all the information, but now I've got to put it in order. I've got to make sense of it. And that's what a download is. And it would be a download of the memories of the contact that I had. And it would just knock me to my knees. And I would have to just sit there and try to process and make sense of when this happened, why it happened, what happened. And, it just, you learn to keep secrets at a very young age. And that's what I've always said is we all have secrets. It's usually because we're embarrassed about our past or we're afraid of being judged. And, for me, it was both things. And I couldn't make sense of what was happening to me. And so I kept quiet. And if I was judged and asked what was wrong with me for simple things about asking religious questions and asking what I considered normal everyday questions, do you really think I was going to come forward and ask about these extraterrestrials that were contacting me? No, I shut up. And, as I got older, there were two friends that I did tell. And I've processed even more since then what I needed from them when I told them about one live experience. They were like, oh, yeah, I believe you, and then switch the subject. And I thought, I've been dealing with this for years and processing it and can't figure it out. How did I expect my friends to immediately process it and embrace me? But that's what I needed and that's what I wanted. At the time, I just didn't get it. And so now I completely understand why they switched the subject. And maybe it's important for people to know that I am a psychic medium. That is my profession. And so obviously I talk about death a lot and I talk to the deceased. And again, people are so uncomfortable talking about death that they switch the subject because they don't want to make people uncomfortable. And so when I spoke through most of my lifetime, it was on subjects that made people uncomfortable. And so they switched it. What's wrong with me? And I must be crazy. What a weirdo.
A lot of
Yeah.
people are afraid to go down those rabbit holes. A lot of people are afraid to face reality. And um and speaking of friends, my childhood friend, best friend that I ever had up until that point, I lost once I started kind of diving into this stuff around '06 when I came back from basic training in my advanced individual training came back. That's kind of when I just started. I don't know what happened. Just started researching my butt off with everything: conspiracies, paranormal, ancient mysteries, and once I started talking about like some of the stuff was okay, like some of the ancient mysteries, me and him would talk like
Mhm.
between '06 and 2009, so about 3 years. But when I started talking about, and conspiracies were okay too, but when I started talking about paranormal, uh, some of my apparition story, the only one I've ever had, um, and talking about UFOs and extraterrestrials, he cut me off. He
Yeah.
told my mother that something's wrong with him. He's he's basically mentally unstable, and which I don't have an experience like you, but I was just more of a, I've had strange things that's happened to me, but I'm mostly just on a journey, a quest, truth and understanding. And that's why I kind of created this show back in 2010. You know, I interviewed lots of people back in 2010 when I started the show. It was actually called Cryptic Knowledge Radio. Interviewed people like John Anthony West, Jesse Marcel Jr., uh, Lloyd Pye with a Star Child skull, whatever, and so many people that aren't with us anymore. And that's when my journey really started when I started doing podcasts. But I totally understand certain things that you save, you know, growing up. Um, I guess give people a little bit of I guess moving whenever you moved from San Francisco or from South Dakota to San Francisco, and what was guiding you, because it's almost, and we're about to start getting into some meat and potatoes here in a minute, like your true, like some of your experiences, but just trying to give a little bit of groundwork of who you are, who KRISTI Pederson is. It's when I heard you say that, and also read it in your book, it kind of made me think of you just traveling almost like a nomad.
Yeah.
Do you think
Yeah.
that
Very
you had
much.
like, do you think you had something guiding you along the way, maybe because you traveling like that, it kind of put you in the position where you are today. All things happen for a reason, you know.
Yeah. And I've always been on a quest for, I've been in 48 of the 50 states. It's like, I'm not going to die without visiting those last two. And then many, many countries as well. But being born and raised in South Dakota, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, talk about landlocked and in an all white community, there was no diversity whatsoever, and Lutheran. Everybody was Scandinavian. Everybody was Lutheran. And, at the time I had long blonde hair like everybody else. This is bought and paid for here, this red stuff. But I remember I got engaged to a gentleman, and I was told by a spirit guide that I was supposed to marry this gentleman because it would be the only proposal I would ever get. The marriage would not last. And I was supposed to be okay with that because I would get is he the one thing out of my system? Like so many people looking for their person, the love of their life. And my marriage lasted about 2.5 years. And well, it was over really pretty much before it began. So that was the catalyst to get me out of South Dakota or Sioux Falls. It's like, this town is not big enough for the two of us. And we really divorced on amicable terms. So there wasn't fighting, there wasn't really ugliness there. But I packed everything I owned in my car and started driving. And I laugh about it today because I forget how much money I had in my purse at the time, but I want to say it was around $100. Could have been less, could have been a little bit more. I don't really remember that. But I say that I just started driving until I ran out of land and ended up in San Francisco. But I was in a really hurry to get there, wherever there was, because I got 4 speeding tickets, one in South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho on my way out there, and ended up in San Francisco, actually the Bay Area, and got a job the day I got there. And then through a friend of a friend, had a place to live. And I moved in with her. And I tell people that's really where I grew up because I was exposed to diversity for the first time instead of this, blonde, white bread world. And I just ate it up. I loved living there. But you're right. I mean, I have lived in the Bay Area of San Francisco and Los Angeles and San Diego, Omaha, Nebraska, Brookings, South Dakota, Knoxville, Tennessee, Phoenix, Arizona. And I always say everywhere I went, there I was. It's like I was running away from who I was, what was wrong with me, trying to figure all this out. And it's like, wherever I went, I still had to face me and figure all this stuff out. And now I still travel a lot, and internationally as well as nationally, but now I do it for the love of travel and the love of education and exposure. Now I know why I'm doing it.
I heard you say before that you chased chaos throughout your life in the
Yeah.
past. So
Mhm.
why did you chase chaos throughout your life, Christy? What do you think promoted you or prompted you to be on that chaotic course? Is it because you knew something wasn't right about yourself? I know you kind of briefly touched on that, and you knew something was off, and this reality isn't quite what it seems to be. Because that kind of
Yeah.
always kind of stood out to me that whenever you said you kind of just chased chaos.
Yeah, I chased it, and if I couldn't catch it, I created it. And so everything had to be drama, drama, drama. And I mean, literally and figuratively, I was in my first play at 12 years old, and I've been in the theater for a good portion of my life because I like, when you're in the theater, you can become someone else and take on that character. And if there wasn't a play to be in, I still had to stir the pot and, talk about people behind their back and stir up trouble and just create. And I think it was for exactly what you said. I couldn't understand humanity. I couldn't understand society. I couldn't understand what I was feeling, why I was feeling it. And so I just stirred the pot, and wherever I went, there was trouble.
So I guess let's go. You kind of went there briefly on your 30th birthday. On your 30th birthday, you had your tubes tied and three beings came to you. That was actually a note I did from the conference, but that was after already I interviewed you. I think I interviewed you before. I think before your, I don't remember, but I
You
never did
interviewed me
ask you
before
that.
the team.
I never did
Hmm.
ask you that. On your 30th birthday, you had your tubes tied and three beings came to you. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, and I'd like to just go back a little bit why I had my tubes tied. I just knew I never wanted to have children. The thought terrified me, and I couldn't understand why anybody else would want to have children. And people would say, "I just found out I'm pregnant." I'm like, "Oh my God, what are you going to do?" And I mean, how
I'm
ridiculous
sorry.
is that? Yeah, it's exactly. And they'd look at me like, "What kind of moron are you? Everybody wants to have children." I'm like, "Yeah, well, not me." And I just knew it. So I waited until I was 30 by the advice of my older sister. And for my 30th birthday present, it was to get my tubes tied. So a couple of weeks after, I had a rare Sunday afternoon that was quiet. I was home alone reading a book, and three extraterrestrials popped into my bedroom. And this is when I mentioned I had two real life experiences. This was the first one. And I could tell they were angry with me. There was one female, two males. They looked very Egyptian to me. And they were talking to me telepathically. And I just could tell they were so angry. What they did when they entered is they paralyzed me. They flipped me over, lifted me up from behind, and did an exam. And what they realized is they could still collect eggs from me. That even though I had my tubes tied, the egg couldn't go down the fallopian tube, but they still had access to it. And then they were okay. And they left as quickly as they came. And I became able to move again. But there I am on my bed on all fours, going, what the hell just happened to me? Now try processing that. And that's, I mean, I stayed with it, tried to work with it. Did I make it up? Was I dreaming? Did I fall asleep? It's like, no, I was wide awake. I was reading a book, and these beings looked like Star Trek characters, which made it even weirder to me, that almost like they were making fun of me. It's like, you know, we know that you, when you were a kid, you watched the original Star Trek, so that's how we're going to show up for you. But just like they showed up as monkeys as a child, now they're showing up like Star Trek characters when I'm an adult. And so I took some time to really process that, and that's when I talked to two different friends of mine at different times. And at the time, I wasn't even public as a psychic medium yet, but I knew what was going through their heads. And it's like, I believe her. Can we still be friends? Is she crazy? Does she need to be committed? Oh, this is pretty cool. You know, it was that a gamut of emotions. But what it told me is that they weren't ready to discuss it, and I need to shut up again. And shut up I did. And I told another friend, similar reaction. However, she worked with a guy who was very open in his interest in UFOs. So she connected us. And I was able to have some conversations with him, but only to a point with UFOs. But then I did more and more research. I couldn't let this go because I knew it was real. I knew it wasn't a dream. I knew it wasn't something I made up. And throughout my research, I found Dr. Jack Kasher, who is the head physicist at UNO, which is the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And he was also the head field investigator for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. And I called him up saying, I need to talk to you, you know, in this shaky voice. And he was nice enough to agree to have an appointment with me. And, you know, mixed emotions as I'm walking across the campus, going, I cannot believe I'm walking across this huge campus to go talk to a physicist. I'm a college dropout, you know, what do I know? The head physicist. And I thought, what if he believes me? What if he doesn't believe me and he thinks I'm crazy? You know, both thoughts were equally terrifying to me. And I sat down and told him my story. And at the time, it was just the one story of the beings coming into my bedroom. And not only did he believe me, he said it probably wasn't an isolated incident. And I kind of glossed that over because it was something I just wasn't ready to deal with at the time. I was just relieved that he wasn't going to tell me to get on medication to, you know, lock me up someplace. But he also told me about a support group. And I was like, what? A support group? There's a support group in Omaha, Nebraska with other people having experiences? And I mean, it was shocking to me. But I went to this support group and it's like I found my tribe. You know, and we were all, I actually barely got to talk at that first meeting because they were so excited to tell me their stories. And I wanted to listen. I didn't know if I was ready to contribute anyway. But the stories were so similar to mine that it was just validating that there really is nothing wrong with me. These things happen to me and they happen to other people too.
So Dr. Carla Turner, I believe she called it virtual reality syndrome or whatever, something like that. And but now I believe we call it false memories or think false memories that are implanted by the ETs. Whenever they showed themselves as like Egyptian looking aliens to you,
Mhm.
that's just them disguising themselves, just like whenever when you're younger as bears. Is what what were the extraterrestrials actually? Were they the grays?
I have been contacted by two different groups in my lifetime. And up until then, yes, it was the Greys.
So I guess we may bounce back and forth a little bit, but to move forward, um, so I know what we're going to talk about, was a very, I guess, an emotional roller coaster ride for you.
To say the least, yes.
Yes. So can you talk about your experience whenever you were in the craft and the Greys brought you your child? Like I said, I know that's an emotional ride, and you've told it several times, many times, and it seemed like it always, you can tell that it's always, you speak about it because you want to share your story, but you can tell it still hits you very hard and at
Yeah.
home. I
Mhm.
guess kind of go give the groundwork for that, and we just go from there, Christy.
Okay. Well, after visiting Dr. Kasher, what really happens is that you give the extraterrestrials a permission slip to start the downloads and start the memories happening. So these things came very, very quickly. But through the process then of several years of downloads of memory, and the second live memory I have is they came to me one night and they said, "We need you to come save your daughter." Now, you know, this is coming from someone who had her tubes tied, that having a child would be considered horrific.
What age were you at this point?
Yeah, I'm really not sure. I want to say I was around 40 at this
Okay.
point. I could be off a little bit on that
So roughly 10
because,
years, so roughly give or take 10 years later from your 30th birthday.
yeah, with 10 years of then downloads
Yeah.
of happening. And so I was very familiar with what was happening to me, but I knew it always came in downloads other than that experience at age 30. So they popped into my bedroom as they do. They don't, they don't ring the doorbell. They don't make an appointment. They just show up and they said, "We need you to save your daughter." And, part of me was like, "What are you talking about?" And then the other part didn't seem odd to me at all. And so I agreed to go on a craft with them. And they put me in this isolated room that was looked like stainless steel white. It was very sterile looking. And they just set me down. And by they, it's the Grays. And they brought in this little girl to me. And she was probably, I don't know, a foot and a half to 2 feet tall. And she weighed ounces rather than pounds. And she looked on the verge of death. And they told me that she was experiencing failure to thrive because she had too much human in her. And they put her in my arms. You're right, it's healing for me to talk about this, but it doesn't mean it's not painful. And they put her in my arms, and every maternal instinct that I didn't think I had kicked into gear. And I held her and kissed her and loved her. And I didn't know what else to do other than just be a mom to her. And I have no concept of time. I think I keep saying it felt like maybe around 4 hours, but again, it could have been 4 days. I really don't know. So I just say about 4 hours, and I physically saw color come back into her face and this peaches and cream complexion. And she was just adorable. She was so sweet. And, the connection in our eyes. And shortly after I saw the color come back into her face, the Grace came back in the room to get her. And I thought, how can I give her? This is my child. This is my daughter. How can I give her to these emotionless beings? And to this day, I struggle with it. And I thought, they might not have an emotional connection to her, but it's the only family she's ever known. And she had an emotional connection to them. And by then, she jumped off my lap. And even though I say she was a foot and a half to 2 feet tall and weighed ounces, she was older. And by older, I want to say maybe age 2, because she could easily walk. And she did. She jumped off my lap and ran over to them into their arms. And I just had to come to terms that I did my job, that I saved her. And she was going back to the only family that she knew. And it breaks my heart to talk about it. I mean, for anybody that's listening that has a child, could you do that? Can you just go, "Here you go. I'll never see you again. Have a good life." And evidently, I'd made a deal with the Grays when they told me that they needed me on that craft, because I knew I had other children. I knew she wasn't the only one. And they agreed to show me my other children. and took me down a hallway to these double doors and opened them to a room that was the size of a small gymnasium. And there were about 35 children in there. They looked alien to me. They were so skinny. It looked like they had no skeletal structure at all. But they had black hair, where my daughter had just wisps of white hair, which is what I had as a child. And they had jet black hair, kind of cut in a bowl cut, but it was just stringy. And the big, huge black eyes. And they were playing games in there, and they looked at me, I said, like a benign intruder. And I looked at them like the aliens they were, shut the doors, and I said, there was no connection whatsoever to these other kids. But I knew they were mine. The only connection I had was to this beautiful little girl. And then as I closed the doors, I woke up in my bed and just, lost it basically.
And I
And
know it's
again,
tough. I know it's tough, and thank you for sharing that. And I know it's tough to probably keep having to repeat the story, but I do think it's important for, because you're always going to have new listeners, and your experiences could help somebody else out there that could be struggling with things that you have struggled with. And so this I pulled the quote from your book. I forgot what chapter it is. All the other quotes that I have from your book, "We Are Not Alone," I actually have the chapter on there. But you said, "quote I was brought into a very sterile looking room and was told to sit down. This room, about the size of an average bathroom in a home, was white and was what appeared to be stainless steel. There was nothing else in the clinical filling room except a chair. A few minutes later, they brought in a little girl who supposedly was my daughter. She was just a tiny bit of a thing, so delicate and fragile looking. Her hair was pure white as mine had been as a child, but sparse, with a few strands pulled to the top of her head and tied with what appeared to be some kind of ribbon. She looked so sick, pale, and barely responsive. As I lifted her up and placed her on my lap, I felt as if she weighed almost nothing. She had a very large, she had she had the large black eyes of the Greys, but otherwise no other common feature. The rest of her looked like a tiny, sick version of me. Every maternal instinct I thought never existed in me suddenly ignited. I hugged her, kissed her, and told her I loved her. She clung to me like any sick child would cling to its mother. As she and I bonded and connected, I physically saw color come into her face. Her skin developed a beautiful peaches and cream complexion, and a sparkle lit up her eyes. She looked more alive, more engaged, and finally healthy. Our time together seemed to last just a few moments or few minutes, but could have been several hours. And I felt like I could never let her go. She was my daughter, my little girl. I was heartbroken knowing I eventually hadn't had to let her go. When the Grays came back to collect her, I struggled to give her back to the non emotional, vacant alien space beings now standing before me. However, as she jumped off my lap and scrambled across the room to the ETs, I quickly realized that they were the only family she knew. They might not have had the emotional, they may not have had emotion towards her, but she certainly had emotions towards them. I had to let her go. I done my job. I helped save her, my child. So, have you seen your child since giving her back to the Grays?
consciously no, but I have been told through other contact that I've had periodic contact with her. And she's an adult now and evidently doing very, very well. But consciously, no, I don't have a memory of ever seeing her again.
What do you think? I know I may be asking you to speculate, but what do you think the purpose for this, I guess, hybrid program is by the Grays, Christy? Had the Grays ever told you, either downloads or physically or whatever, what the agenda and or reasonings behind this hybrid program is?
And I think there's a few different reasons, but what I've been told is the Greys have basically lost their ability to procreate. And so they're creating this hybrid species um, to keep their own species going, but also to seed another planet. And I tell people that even on planet Earth, we're all seeded from someplace else. We come from other planets, other star systems. And that's what they have told me, is that it is this whole program is to seed another planet because they are unable to do it on their own. They've lost that ability to procreate.
And you stated, maybe paraphrasing, that they acted very robotic in nature. I think that's what you
Almost
said.
AI.
Almost
Yeah.
AI. And that is, I've interviewed many people, of course, since 2010. And one particular, Daryl Sims, who I've interviewed in person and a podcast also, but in person at, I think, the Skydancer UFO conference in Houston, Texas. And he stated that he stated the same thing, that they're very robotic in nature, and he believes that they were made, hatched, and cloned themselves to
Oh,
to
I know.
fulfill some type of purpose or agenda. Um, but when you're on the ship with the Grays, KRISTI, is is this solely in the physical form, or is it something more deeper than just the physical? Kind of like that, kind of like they are able to take your spirit and or consciousness onto the craft to kind of have a etheric type of experience, or was it a little both?
It's very much physical with the Greys. With this other group that we can talk about, that's a little bit different story. But no, if you went into my bedroom, my bed would be empty. It's physical. And they would put me on a gurney. And I've got many, many, many memories of that. And evidently the craft was round because the gurneys loaded with what looked like 100 different people who had been abducted at the time. It would mimic the inside of the craft. And it was almost like we were on a conveyor belt. And there was an examining table, I guess, with doctors, assistants, things like that. And the beds would keep moving. And when it came close to my turn for the examination, they would put my feet in stirrups and lift the sheet. So the doctor, when it came my turn, the doctor would just very robotically do an exam on me, on my genitalia. And then when he was done, pull the sheet down and the bed would keep going. I would be escorted down the hall to put my clothes on and then back in bed. Because I would wake up in the morning with my pajamas on different ways. I would wake up with my head at the foot of the bed. I would wake up with blood coming out of my ears. You just physical things that if they were just taking my soul or my spirit, that wouldn't have happened.
Before I read this next quote from, I think the chapter titled, Hybrid Children. Because a lot of this stuff is deep emotionally.
Yeah.
So how are you able to cope with your experiences and share them? I guess what I'm saying is, what did you do to help you spiritually, consciously, to be able to cope and come forward and to be able to share these experiences? Because there may be people out there that has had similar things that's happened to them. What advice can you give to those people before I read this next quote that's pretty deep also?
Well, and I tell people the subtext of everything I do is courage and not to have secrets because these are legitimate things that happen to people. And in the past, we've all been made to look ridiculous. Anybody who came out with I saw a UFO, I was abducted, ooh, by little green men, and whether it be the press, other people, they would make us look stupid and ridiculous,
I
which is
don't even
why I
have, I'm
didn't.
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I don't even have those type of experiences, KRISTI. Not like you and others. I've had, just researching it.
Yeah,
I've been chastised. You know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah, and as a psychic medium, I've got clients that are very interested in the paranormal and talking to deceased loved ones, but they cannot cross the line to extraterrestrials. Like, nope, can't go there. And I have to respect their beliefs, and I ask that they respect mine. Some do, some don't. It depends. All right, where are we going? I got
Well,
got off track a little bit.
well, what if you had to pick one thing? You may have said it. what do you recommend them to do to be able to cope though?
What I would recommend,
Meditate or what,
what I would actually do is contact MUFON, and you can just do MUFON.org, and there will be somebody to talk to, and they will connect you to a support group of some kind. And some of them you can do over Zoom, some are in person, depending on where you live. But I am the contact person for the state of Nebraska for MUFON. So anybody who contacts them anywhere in the state, they will connect them to me. And I will have a Zoom call with them, I'll have a phone call with them, and let them know they're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. These things happen to millions of us. And we're just now having the courage to come forward with our
and
stories.
and also you can read KRISTI Peterson's book "We Are Not Alone" by Extraterrestrial Contact, and she also has a new book that we'll probably will briefly talk about, but we're going to have a interview by itself with our new book, Messages from Ramadir, Collective Hope for Humanity. But I don't have that book, but I got the We Are Not Alone book, and she tells her life story, everything, and maybe that can help you cope and go through some of your traumas and things like that. Also, things that I'm sure there's a lot of people out there listening, or people that will eventually listen, that has had similar experiences. So, and I'm all about solutions, trying to, because a lot of people don't like to talk about solutions and things, how to go down that road,
Yeah.
But so in a chapter in your book, We Are Not Alone, called Hybrid Children, you said, quote, by age 35, I was having severe issues with my female organs. 1 week I would feel pregnant, and the next I felt normal. There was frequent pain and severe bleeding during my menstrual cycle. The discomfort I felt didn't seem to stop or even reduce the number of exams I was subjected to by the ETs. Often I feel like I had been contacted in a few weeks or even in months, and just a breath of sigh of relief, thinking maybe they were finished with me. Then a download would happen, and I was back on a gurney in a craft. And do you think maybe one reason you had so many problems with your organs, KRISTI, was due to all the tampering maybe by the Greys?
Absolutely.